The first session of today is titled Circular Ecosystem and Opportunities of Electric Vehicle Batteries. It is our honor to have Mr. Walter van Hattum, Head of Trade and Economic Section of EU Office to Hong Kong and Macau, to deliver his keynote presentation. Mr. van Hattum, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Bruno Luc. I don't know if he's still here, but it was a very good overview and an excellent presentation of what's happening in Hong Kong, and a lot of that actually we discussed together also with the EU colleagues during various events. Thanks Simon, thanks Merlin, who is chairing this session, asking me to say a few words about the EU Green Deal, and especially when it comes to batteries. We actually have a piece of legislation to be adopted very soon, and it's the first time ever in terms of EU legislation, or at least as far as I could check, where the circular economy is embedded in one piece of legislation. And I'll explain a bit more on that in this hopefully short presentation. Policy context, we have an EU Green Deal. Basically, we want to reduce emissions to zero by 2050 and by 55% already by 2030, which every time I say that, I realize time is not on our side. We have a lot of work to be done, and I would say that this is probably the biggest political challenge within the European Union, but also within the world, Hong Kong, elsewhere. We want to lead on the next industrial revolution by making sure that all the technology, all the products in the European Union are of the greenest possible standards. We've been very successful using our emission trading systems, and I understood this morning there was a discussion on carbon pricing and trading, and this is one of the areas where actually we were able to cut our emissions by 43% since the introduction of our European trading system, and we plan to cut it further by a lot more. On energy, we actually just took another kind of bold decision to further reduce our energy dependency, partly triggered by political events, an invasion in Ukraine, trying to get rid of Russian gas dependency, as well as other fuel sources. Now, how do we do that? On the one hand, we made a commitment that whatever we use on energy, which is roughly 75% of EU emissions, whatever we do, we want to make it renewables. And we have an immediate target of 40%. At the same time, we also want to reduce the overall energy needs in the Union by another 40%. So if you add those up, you get quite a big reduction. And the latest is that we increase the target also of our government entities to make another efficiency gain of 1.5% per year. So that adds up as well, including renovating roughly 3% of our buildings. Now, other related policies, and you see here this graph with the 55%. We want to achieve that by basically installing this climate change awareness and measures on all the industries within the European Union. But just to mention another few, EU transport, responsible for 25% of emissions. Just like Hong Kong, we made the ambition to have zero emissions in the near future, including our cars by 2035. But for instance, what we are also doing is we are including road transport in the emission trading system. So again, the polluter will actually have to pay for the emissions, and that is already taking effect very soon. We have an EU Circular Action Plan. It's a little bit the strategy, as you saw just described by the Environmental Bureau, but the strategy is that whatever you produce, already when you start designing your product, you need to be aware and responsible, so what happens after the end life of the product. And you see in a lot of the legislation coming out that, I mean, I give it a lot, but I mean, these kind of phones will be history in the European Union because you cannot change anything without buying a new phone, which is completely waste of materials. We foresee that you can actually reduce greenhouse gas by 39% globally if you would actually install this circular economy concept in all your industry. That's a lot, 39%. You can save 90% of biodiversity loss and water stress if you look at how do you do your extraction and your processing of raw materials. And these are not figures that come from the EU, these are basically by international fora. A last piece of legislation is our due diligence. We have a new law coming up, which basically makes companies accountable for their full supply chain when it comes to environmental risks, risks related to human rights and labor rights. That will come into effect as well very soon. I mention these things because they all come together in this piece of legislation on the batteries, so bear with me. So what about batteries? First of all, for the business people here, and it's the Business Environmental Council, it's a market of 2 trillion Hong Kong dollars, an estimate, when you talk about batteries. What we realized in Europe is that we want to create more recycling, more production, etc., because we need that for our Green Deal. But we have 3 problems, actually. One is we don't have many investors in this sector in the European Union as we speak. Second, the recycling markets of batteries are not really functioning very well in the European market. And third, we don't have an integrated law which looks at the social and the environmental risks related to batteries. So what we want to do is to actually make sure that we cover these problems. And one of them is on the slide here, which I quite like, which is from the World Economic Forum. It looks that if you want to cater the needs in the world for batteries, which is estimated to grow by 14 times in the next years, by 2030, it has a big impact on the whole supply chain. So on raw materials, on mining, you need to up by 5 times or even 40 times for some of the minerals. For the refining, for the cell production and the recycling, similar numbers. Now, if you look at where do we need these batteries for, on the one hand, geographically, a lot in China, secondly, the European Union, the US, and then the rest of the world, this enormous growth. But if you look at the sectors where we need this for, electric mobility is actually growing by 26 times. Again, this is 2030. For people my age, that's basically tomorrow. I mean, for the younger people, it's a bit longer. But now, then the right hand of this slide looks at what it means for the raw materials in terms of production. I need to move onwards. So what are we going to do in the EU? We are going to strengthen the EU market. This graph on your right, happy to teach you in another event, but it basically shows that the regulation looks at the whole lifespan of a battery, from sourcing up until recycling or repurposing. We want to make all batteries more sustainable, circular and safe throughout their life cycle. We want to establish primary and secondary markets for sustainable batteries, provide legal certainty for investment so that they know in advance what are the criteria that we want to have in the future, and we want to reduce human health, environmental and social impacts. I've seen upfront what the devastating impact can be, for instance, of children working on these kind of issues, for another discussion. Main elements, sustainability and safety. We want to produce batteries with the lowest possible environmental impact, using materials that meet social and ecological standards, mostly recycled, and cutting substances like mercury and cadmium in the batteries. Batteries will be obliged to be long-lasting, repurposeful, removable, and replaceable by consumers, the ones that are in your phones or TVs or whatever. We want to manage the waste, promoting circularity of our battery market. We are going to phase out non-rechargeable batteries, the timing to be decided, but as soon as we can. And we're going to work on extended producer responsibility obligations to not only finance, but also organize separate collection and treatment of waste batteries. For electric vehicles, industrial batteries, we will oblige reporting to make sure that there's no losses anywhere throughout the supply chain. This is a beautiful picture, but this shows a bit what will be the ambitions. On the one hand, we want to increase the collection. On the other hand, to increase the recycling efficiency. So, for instance, for nickel, for 80%, for lithium moving from 65 to 70%, but then also increasing the material recovery targets, again for instance, lithium, from 50% to 80% in 2031. These are sort of ambitious futuristic targets, But our scientists have sort of said, well, this should be achievable, and we want to really go for the highest level of ambition. Labeling and information. A lot of information will be on a QR code on the one hand, where, for instance, as a consumer, you can immediately see what is the lifetime carbon footprint of the battery that I purchase. What is the expanded duration of the battery? Is it the first battery, or is it kind of repurposed already? All that information will be available. And we will make a due diligence requirement which sort of links with this corporate sustainability due diligence regulation directive, which is coming out very soon. Digital battery passport will be introduced in 2027, again capturing all the information that you want to know, either as an investor or as a consumer or a producer of what's on the battery. I'm really sorry for the fine print, and I'm at 0 seconds, but I'm almost there. On due diligence, just one comment. We base ourselves on work done by the OECD, but we want to go far beyond that. So for the industry colleagues here, this is really something to look at. So due diligence will go beyond what I just mentioned, but also, for instance, look much more closely in the impact on air quality, water, soil, biodiversity, human health, occupational safety and health, the workers working in these factories, labor rights and human rights. Think about the mining especially. What about Hong Kong? What has this got to do with Hong Kong? 2 points. Implications for third countries will be quite impactful because the rules will not only apply for batteries being produced in the European market, it will apply for all the batteries coming on the European market, so also those that are imported, and also including the batteries that are part of an appliance. So if you want to import, let's say, a computer with a battery or any other item, a telephone, it will also have to fulfill these new rules, which includes, again, due diligence, carbon footprints, declarations, and a minimum of recoverable materials. We have a waste shipment regulation in place that says that no longer shall EU companies be allowed to export these kind of waste outside the EU. That links a bit with the circular action plan I mentioned before, but it also means that you need to really sort out your waste when you start putting it on the market. This is all in conformity with international rules, including WTO, etc. Now, a last point. We don't do this alone. We had a really good and successful event which was called the Green Way Forward, where actually the Business Environment Council was one of our partners. And what we tried to achieve is bring Hong Kong industry together with European industry and let them sit together of sort of finding joint solutions. And you see here a few of the recommendations related to this topic. Invest Hong Kong was also there and sponsoring the event with thanks. You see that some of the recommendations go specifically on batteries because we really have an issue. All these batteries that people are now driving in their cars will come available not too long from now, but also looking a bit at the mindset of the general public to see how we can actually encourage bureaucrats like myself, and you have many of those here in Hong Kong too. How can you actually mobilize us to work just a little bit harder on these issues? I had one last point before I say thank you. In conclusion, thank you, the EU law will be adopted in June. Political agreement has been found, so it's just a matter of time and it will come out, and happy to share with you. The extended producer responsibility will then take effect by 2025. In 3.5 years, the ambition is that batteries should be designed to be easily removable and replaceable. That means a lot of impact on the products shipped to the European market. And by 2030, we want to phase out non-rechargeable portable batteries, if possible. Now, to conclude, batteries are a key technology in support of climate neutrality. And our aim is to build a stronger recycling industry, partly for our energy transition and also for the independence from fuel imports. I would say this is the first piece of circular economy legislation that's coming out concretely from the EU. It's partly for the batteries, but I would say it goes a bit beyond it. It's also for our planet, our people, and our economy. I do hope this will be a benchmark for the entire global battery market, but I'm more than happy to be challenged in the panel or outside. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Van Hanten. Please be seated. Now, may I invite Mr. Anthony Yang, Senior Staff Scientist of China Everbright Green Technology Innovation Research Institute to deliver his keynote presentation. Please.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Really thanks BEC to holding this conference. So it's very glad to share our experience here about battery recycling. So the topic of my presentation is the mainland China's battery recycling and the lessons for Hong Kong. Firstly, just short introduce our companies. So Everbright Environmental, China Everbright Environmental Group Limited is a flagship enterprise of China Everbright Group Limited in the industrial sections. Everbright Environmental is listed on the main board of the Stock Exchange of Hong Kong Limited. Since shifting its business focus to the environmental protection sector in 2003, the company has grown into the largest environmental enterprise in China, a leading player in Asia environmental protection industry, the world's largest waste-to-energy investor and operators. So for our company, actually, we have 8 business units. We have business unit focused on the waste-to-energy, the business unit focused on the wastewater treatment, and also the business unit focused on the biomass power generations. So actually, I was from the EnviroTech. We focus on the green technology innovations. And for battery recycling, actually, we help our companies to build up this business. So we have 4 offices in China and Hong Kong. So Hong Kong, our office is in Science Park. Welcome to visit our office. So here comes to the battery recycling market. The global power battery recycling market is expected to accelerate its development and the project to exceed 100 billion in the next 5 years. Among them, the market space for lithium is most attractive. So we can see from the figure, actually, after 2025, the whole battery recycling market will dramatically grow. I believe that Hong Kong battery recycling is very similar. Maybe after 2026, the business will increase dramatically. So here is the politics system in mainland China. So developed countries overseas have well-established politics and regulation related to battery recycling after many years of development. In the past decade, China has also increased the density of battery recycling policies and the regulations. So most policies and the regulation come from these 2 departments. The first one is the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology of the People's Republic of China. The second one is the National Energy Administrations. These 2 departments improve the establishment of policies systems and also strengthen the standardizations and the regulations. The most policies and the regulation is published after 2018. So for the battery recycling companies in mainland, actually there are 3 kinds of the battery recycling companies. Before 2016, the key player is the third-party battery recycling companies. And after 2016, the mining companies also joined this battery recycling business. Another kind of battery recycling business companies is the vehicle companies. In China, only BYD doing this kind of business. They just want to build up a closed loop of industrial chain for their own business, vehicle business. And for the power battery recycling method, actually they have 2 kinds of recycling method. The first is the cascaded utilization. The second one is dismantling recycling. For the cascaded utilization, it's very simple. We get the retired battery, we're doing the shorting, pick up the retired battery still with good qualities, and then use it not for the EV, but use it for the energy storage and the UPS. The advantage is that it can improve the battery value because we can use from the health from 80 or 70 to maybe around 50. But the disadvantage of this technique is that it's very low efficiency because we need to check the situation of each battery cells. And it's not suitable for the ternary batteries. For the dismantling recycling, it's also very simple. We just get the battery cells, dismantle it, and get the raw materials inside it. But we need to consider that for this recycling method, actually they have some waste liquid and also some gas pollutions. We need to handle it. So here is the typical battery recycling process. When we get the waste battery pack, we need to discharge it first and then do the dismantling. Get the waste battery cells. The battery cell then we dismantle it and crush it. The most important thing is that after crushing it, we can get the black powder. We have the electrolyte, the plastic, copper, alumina, but the most attractive one is the black powder. Inside black powder, we have lithium, cobalt, and nickel inside it. We can choose to using the wet chemistry to get the raw material, or we can choose another method, it's the pyrogenic method to get the raw materials. So most battery recycling companies in mainland, they use the wet chemistry because it's very cheap. For the wet chemistry method, the equipment cost and the energy cost is low, and the efficiency is high. The recycle efficiency normally is over 99%. But for environment, we need to take care that they have the waste liquid. We need to handle it. And for another method, pyrogenic process, actually, it's very high equipment cost and energy cost. And the process is very simple. We just put the battery cells in the oven, and then it can be, and then go to around maybe 800 degrees, and it can be, we can get the lithium, cobalt, and the nickel, such raw materials. But we need to handle the gas pollutions. So most companies, most mainland battery recycling companies, they choose wet chemistry just because the cost is very low. So for the battery recycling in Hong Kong, so I summarize here. Recycling and utilization business usually involve the following: collection and sorting of the recyclable materials, inspection and evaluation of the materials, selection and implementation of the recycling technologies, resource recovery and reuse. The last one is the waste treatment and the environmental protections. Based on the development trend of the power battery recycling industry, battery recycling in Hong Kong need to consider the following issues. The first one is the channels, how to establish and lay out our own recycling network. The second one is the technology, which recycling process we need to choose for the battery recycling in Hong Kong. The last one is the production capacity, how to plan and lay out for the next coming 3 to 5 years. So to summarize the problem we need to handle in Hong Kong, so 3 years later, we need to face 6,000 tons of the retired batteries. We need to think about how to build up the network in Hong Kong to get the retired batteries, and whether we choose the cascade utilization, whether we crush it, and which chemical process, which process we get the raw materials, to get the raw materials, the pyrogenic process or the wet chemistry. We need to find the suitable locations. And also we need to build up the pilot line first. And later we still need to think about the ramp up. So that's all. We still have a lot of things to handle later. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Yan. Please remain on stage for the panel discussion later. As a reminder, online participants are welcome to use the Q&A box if you have any questions for our speakers. For audience in the room, please raise your hands and we will pass you the mic. Now, please welcome our moderator of this session, Mr. Merlin Now, Head Policy and Research of BEC. Please also welcome our panelists, Engineer Professor Daniel Zhang, Mr. Walter Van Hampton, Mr. Anthony Yan, Mr. David Lai, and Mr. Raymond Zhang on stage for the panel discussion. Merlin, over to you, please.
Thank you. Please be seated. I think we have the photos here. Thank you again. I hope the presentation is interesting and not too technical for our audience here. And we have a good panel here. What I'm trying to do is to set a little bit background here. I think this morning, Mr. CF Wong mentioned for last year, the registration of new vehicle is half of them are EVs. And basically the battery issues would need to be solved sooner or later in a few years' time. And the presentation, we cover quite a bit of this. We heard the presentation from the EU perspective, also some of the policy and treatment in the mainland perspective. And what I'm going to do is to hand the floor to our panelists that have not yet spoken here to basically drill into three areas first. One, we listen to the EU, we listen to China, mainland China, and how about what the Hong Kong government is thinking about. And also we have representative from the upper value chain, EV supplier, JC Motor here, as well as Dunwell from the downstream recycling industry. So we try to utilize this half hour to give a thorough overview of what we are trying to think here in Hong Kong. So without further ado, maybe the floor is to you, David. Like after hearing the EU and the mainland presentation, let us know a little bit more like what the Hong Kong government is thinking about. Please.
Thank you, Merlin. At present, retired EV batteries are classified as chemical waste under the Waste Disposal Ordinance and Chemical Waste Regulations. And EV are maintained and repaired by EV suppliers or designated maintenance workshops in Hong Kong. Under the current legislation, if the EV suppliers or the maintenance workshop produce waste battery, they must register as chemical waste producer with EPD and arrange for proper labeling storage and arranging the proper collections by licensed chemical waste producer and deliver to the licensed waste disposal facilities. The licensed waste disposal facilities will arrange obtaining consent from the state of import and then export the waste batteries to overseas treatment facilities for recycling. From 2017 to 2021, an annual average of about 24 tons per year of lithium battery from vehicles were handled by the licensed disposal facilities in Hong Kong. And the 4 licensed waste disposal facilities in Hong Kong have an aggregate disposal capacity of about 12,000 tons waste EV battery per year. So in 2021, the government announced the Hong Kong roadmap on popularization of electric vehicles, which set out clear strategies for promoting the use of EV. And the government will continue the expansion of EV charging network, training of mechanics and technicians, and also set the policy directions for the introduction of a producer responsibility scheme of EV batteries to further enhance the proper collections and recycling of retired EV batteries. The EV roadmap also set out the target to cease new registration of fuel-propelled private cars in 2035 or earlier. The percentage of electric private car among all newly registered PC has increased from 6% in 2019 to about 52% in 2022. At present, 1 out of every 2 newly registered private cars is electric. Considering the increase in EV adoption rate in Hong Kong, it is about time for us to introduce the PRS scheme on EV batteries in the coming years to ensure the EV batteries are treated properly.
Okay, maybe I come back to you later, David. Maybe then you want to pass floor to Raymond first. Then Raymond, I mean, you are selling vehicles here in Hong Kong. David just now mentioned the Hong Kong government is going to make regulation to make better control and record of the battery flow. So what is the current practice that you are doing here with the batteries in Hong Kong? And maybe if you think the regulation is going on, what are the main areas that as EV suppliers that you would be most concerned with? Yeah.
Thank you, Merlin. We are currently adopting the situation under the condition if the battery is at retire level, we would use it at our premises in Hong Kong. And secondly, we are working and collaborating with the education sector. For example, VTC and IFE, we try to work with them to create a program to train the Hong Kong electric vehicle technician, because most of the mechanic or technical staff right now, they only performing the gasoline and diesel engines maintenance program. However, they need to train up much more technician and authorized staff to do the maintenance. That's the second usage of the retired battery. The last one is the most difficult one, because under the current legislation of the Hong Kong government, we are unable to ship the retired battery from Hong Kong to China. However, we find a way out is contact a licensed company to tow the complete car from Hong Kong to China. It may cost much more than what we pay for some of the recycling company to have the battery shipped to other country. But most likely we would like to have the legislation passed in the future time, because of the keep growing number of EV in Hong Kong. I believe it should be a much more practical way and efficiency way to have the battery replaced in China. Thank you.
Then set the scene for you, Daniel, as a Dunwell local recycling with experience. How do you see the downstream handling right now, and what is your 2 cents on this? Yeah.
Well, thank you. I think I'm one of the guys that are really getting the hands-on firsthand dealing with the EV batteries. Back when we have the first EV cars in Hong Kong, we were already involved with the auto importers, talking about how do we properly recycle. Now, the whole concept about recycling back then, or even part of it now, is we're still talking about taking the battery and take it to a recycling plant, turn it into a black mass, and get whatever material you can, and get the valuable components out, the material. But as an environmental industrialist, and dealing with those batteries all these years, I really felt that we are not looking in the right way. When you take out, let's say a Tesla, a battery, you'll be amazed how much money and technology is involved in that battery. Okay, when we talk about battery, everybody thinks just like a little, a pin battery, and we talk about black mass. But in fact, the value of the whole battery is the whole design, the BMS, the cooling system, all the circuitry to control the battery. In case you have a bad cell, it will automatically isolate itself, jump to the next one. And all this will go to waste once you scrap it. So I have been pushing and suggesting repurposing it. Maybe, I think we're talking about 5-6 years ago, we had the first conference in the Science Park in the Golden Egg auditorium. There we already talked about repurposing the battery at least as an energy storing device. Now, but the challenge is, earlier speaker already said, well, how do you know how good the battery or bad the battery is? So you need to go through a very sophisticated testing program. Now, I'm a solution seeker. I said, well, will the car manufacturers nice enough to share that BMS with just anybody? Of course not, okay? Except if you are BYD, then maybe BYD will know. So to solve that problem, I'm just thinking, what if any one of the electrical EV manufacturers have to comply with the government regulation that you need to use those batteries that has the energy density still between 70 or so, whatever usable level. You build your own energy device, because I don't know about your BMS design, but you do. You design it, and so you retain X amount of those such batteries for energy storage. You could sell it. You can make money. That's what Elon Musk was thinking about, the power wall, right, back then. But then he found out it's more cheaper to buy new batteries than recycle his batteries. But for the environmental point of view, we should look into that, rather than wasting all this technology and material and turn it into black mass. But for those batteries that is totally, useless, then you turn it into black mass. Then suddenly you reduce the amount of waste, and you can reuse. And for the car companies, they have a new product to sell. So I'm kind of getting a little lengthy on that. That's why I want to be the last one. But really, this is something that more idealistic. As a recycler, doesn't benefit me because it goes back to all the car. But I think for the long term, for the environment, for the carbon neutral direction, this may be something we should think about. Thank you.
Picking up what Daniel mentioned, maybe we can move the floor to water. What do you think about this? Daniel actually mentioned to build a more system at the manufacturer level. He also mentioned about the difficulty of recycling. How do you see these new regulations impact positively or negatively and in the EU context, and whether it adjusts some of the points that Daniel mentioned just now?
No, excellent points. Thank you, Daniel. And I think part of in the EU regulation is exactly this point of repurposing the batteries. So indeed, you don't need to just dismantle it immediately if you can still give it a second, third, or fourth life. And for this, the introduction of this passport, that's also in our regulation, will be very important, because then if you buy, let's say, a car or another machine which has such a battery in it, you know exactly kind of what is the carbon footprint, you know what is the capacity still available in the battery. So no, I'm all for it. Yeah, thanks.
Then how about maybe back to David? I think just now, I think also Daniel mentioned about, and today's topic we talk about opportunities. Actually, we see the values of batteries. We know that the producer responsibility scheme's core principle is polluter play, and try to ensure the battery is clearly flow and measurement and record. How do you see this PRS scheme may potentially nurture the downstream repurposing or the industry? Does it play a role to strengthen recycling in Hong Kong, for example? Yeah?
After we sending out the PRS scheme to the recyclers, many local recycling companies are quite interested in set up the local recycling plants in Hong Kong for EV batteries and other lithium-ion batteries. And a few of them are also interested in the repurposing of the retired battery into second life use. And the problem is they face the problem is they don't have the information system. So we encourage or we will require the EV manufacturer or suppliers to share the information such that for the recyclers, they can use it either for recycling or the better to use as a second life use for the batteries.
So there will be requirements on the EV supplier side, actually on the potential scheme operator as well. Maybe back to Raymond. So foreseeing the upcoming regulation, you will continue to sell vehicle, but obviously the main logic behind is the EV supplier, they need to ensure responsible collection of the batteries and the treatment. So how do you see this regulation kicking in and any impact to your business, and how would you prepare for that? And please.
Thank you. I think this is a huge impact. First of all, I think my annual salary will be reduced. Because what happened is a PRS system supposedly to be a very ideal policy. I totally, personally, I totally agree with this government policy. Just like the air conditioner. Whoever produced the air conditioner, when you trade in the old one, you have trade in the new one, you have to bear the cost. That should be the cost of the factory, the producer itself. However, come to the real world, when we negotiate or have a meeting with the BYD factory every month, we also touch on this particular topic. However, we may need to share a bit of such PRS costs. Not only the producer, the name and the policy may call the PRS scheme. However, on our side, if we share a bit of that particular cost, we'd also honestly pass a small portion to the end user. So recently we have a talk with the MTA. Thank you, Michael here, also brought up this issue. We try to work with the government and try to propose something like the MIB. When you purchase a vehicle, you have paid 3% on the insurance called the, I think it's Motor Insurance Bureau. Would it be possible for the related government department to collect some sort of additional cost? Let's say increase a bit on the licensing per year cost, and that would set up a fund that would benefit to all of the producer and also all of the EV distributor in Hong Kong. I believe this is possible to continue discussing about this future issue. Thank you.
Maybe very quick follow-up. Now we do not have the regulation yet, right? So you are bearing some cost. Of course, you sell the car, you collect that. What's the financial side on? You don't need to tell the exact number, but because now we don't have the regulation yet, you are still doing something on this. How do you currently deal with this on the financial?
Put it this way, I believe our current plan is we try to work with other distributors in Hong Kong, try to work with the MTA, see if we can form up an NGO organization. In the long run, try to get the land approved by the Hong Kong government and try to do what we call the centralization, to centralize a particular organization to produce the facility and also the technology to have the retired battery with or without second life to do the recycling in Hong Kong. For example, say a land assigned in Science Park. If we are able to work out with such NGO, I believe it will benefit to all the EV distributor and also all the Hong Kong people and to the Asia as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Maybe Anthony, I think you touched upon about the business case. I know probably China Everbright is also interested in this business. And actually, maybe a few more words. Of course, when government implement the future regulation, one would imagine that there will be market player coming in to take the responsibility, maybe to help smaller EV supplier to consolidate data and actually do some of this recycling process. And I think some of the audience may have interest here, including you. So what do you see, you mentioned a little bit in your PowerPoint, how do you see the market in Hong Kong? You even mentioned the methodology. With your experience in Hong Kong and mainland China right now, what does your business or China Everbright thinking in mind of your upcoming scenario?
Okay. So for me, I think in Hong Kong, the most important issue for EV battery, the first one is environmental issue. The second one is the safety. So for the environmental issue, actually, I think in China we use wet chemistry to handling this when we get the black powder. But in Hong Kong, actually, I think it's not suitable to use wet chemistry because there are so many liquid waste. We cannot handle it easily. I visited some battery recycling companies in Mainland. It's actually very hard to handle the waste. So I think in Hong Kong, better we just disassemble and then crash it, get black powder is enough. We do not deal with the wet chemistry. This is first thing that for the environmental. The second one is that I think the important issue is the safety. Because we have read a lot of news about that the lithium battery is very dangerous if we do not discharge it, totally discharge it. So I have visited some battery recycling company in China. Actually, they use some small machine or something very close to the vehicle companies. When the battery, you get the battery, retired battery from the vehicle, they can discharge as soon as possible, totally discharge it. And then you can maybe just transport the lithium battery in a safe method. So I think these two technologies, I will try to use it in Hong Kong. And the last thing is about the business in Hong Kong. Actually, finally, is the finance. Finance is important for this business. Actually, mainland China and Hong Kong, there are some difference. Maybe there are also differences between mainland China and overseas. For overseas, the battery companies or maybe the vehicle companies need to pay for the battery recycling companies, pay for them to get the batteries. But in China, it's totally different. The battery recycling company need to buy from the battery companies. So it's totally different. I think there are some business opportunity here because there are huge, there are huge difference between here and we can build up some business. Maybe just in Hong Kong, we disassemble it and make it to the black powder. And then maybe we transport the black powder to mainland China or some Vietnam to doing the wet chemistry, then sell the raw material back to mainland China. So this is how the business model up to now.
Maybe very quickly pick up on this safety issue question. I think anyone can answer this, right? Of course, there will be more batteries coming in, and in order to do recycling or repurposing, you need to dismantle in scrapyard. So in scrapyard in Hong Kong, we are dealing with normal vehicle, but you already mentioned from a science perspective, lithium batteries can be very, very dangerous. So how can we ensure, given the experience, given your 2 cents, anyone can answer this, even David can answer this, how can we potentially, possibly avoid the cases that these batteries are not mishandled in some of the not so competent scrapyard in Hong Kong? Can anyone have some insight on that? Because safety, very important question.
Well, thank you. I think that to answer your question, I believe that each one of the car manufacturers, they have a whole idea how to recycle or how to take the battery out of the system, discharge them. They must have a system, right? I think the challenge in Hong Kong is we have so many different cars coming in. Some of them could be trying the market only with small volume, only selling 50 cars in the beginning. May not work, and end up they got 50 cars they got to deal with. But for Tesla, they got a lot more cars. BYD got a lot more cars. They are capable to handle it much more easier. But again, I'm trying to think in an industry-wide solution is we should still put the responsibility back on the car manufacturer. If you sell a car, you should have the responsibility to either remove the battery out safely, okay? You may not be responsible for scrapping the whole battery, but you should be responsible for taking it out safely, rather than leave it to the luck of some scrapyard guys that they can do it right. And that's where the accident happens. I also wanted to mention, jump into a little bit about the PRS, the fees. Well, be real, no matter the fees charged by the government upfront or paid by the car dealers, it's still the consumer paying it. We are paying it one way or another, either you like it or not, right? Because nobody is going to subsidize you, even though they say subsidize you just in the front, but at the end you're still paying for it. So we should just make it clear that certain percentage should go into help such kind of recycling operation. The money should go into helping them, not going into somebody's pocket or some government fund that just go into general funds. That would not help the recycling industry. I've been in the recycling business for the last 30 years, from waste oil and all that. So I was the first one that got licensed to do the EV and also the lead acid battery. So I've seen all that have go through in the past. So the challenge is somebody has to pay, and the government has to regulate, and then we need to find a location that you can handle it properly. But my earlier suggestion is if the car manufacturers are given a choice, either you design your own repurposed, let's say, battery storage device to use this expired battery, or you have to take it out to a black mass scrapper. So either one, then at least the problem is solved. But then by using the recycled battery, repurpose it, you reduce the waste immediately and increase that application for solar, for wind, for whatever storage.
Perhaps I can add a bit comment regarding your questions. In fact, 2 weeks ago, Hong Kong government, various departments, especially EMSD, went to the BYD worldwide headquarters with us because they would like to see how the BYD factory have trained up their technicians, especially on the battery part. That they care the most, especially in Hong Kong. More and more dealers is selling the EV, but the point is just like what Merlin say. If the owner sell the car or trade in the used car market, that we have no control. The used car dealer may just scratch the vehicle, and the unqualified technician, they are not even trained up to take the particular car battery away from the car. That create not only dangerous to the human being, but also the environment as well. So I believe the government, I'm guessing that will be regulated all the service staff, technically or mechanically, they will need to be licensed and to be monitored. I believe this should be the proper way to protect all the EV maintenance-related workers. Thank you.
We understand that EMSD is doing the regulatory work or registration scheme for the mechanics and technicians, and you'll see how it will come out. And on the safety issues, under the PRS scheme, we will require the EV suppliers to provide the designated return point for the car owner to return their EV batteries. under a very safe or competent workshop to do it. Most likely, the EV supplier may prefer to ask the consumer or the vehicle owner to get back their car to their workshop. And so the vehicle owner or the end user can return their vehicle or batteries to the EV suppliers free of charge under our proposed PRS scheme. This is one point. Regarding your suggestion on charging the vehicle owners certain kind of percentage on their license, and under our proposed PRS model, we are planning to implement a market-based model. That means we allow the market to arrange the setting up of the return point, the collections, and recycling, such that the market can use the market force and the commercial considerations to plan or to lower the recycling cost or do it much more effective and cost efficient, such that the charge, even shared by the consumer or the EV supplier, can have a lower cost, like at many other places overseas.
We will definitely come back to this discussion later between different stakeholders. And maybe on the floor, I know we are talking about specific topic. I want to see if anyone on the floor has question to our panelists. Anyone in particular? If no, I turn online. Actually, there's a question. There are two questions, but I combined it. It's about, again, not on the collection, but more on the downstream treatment and recycling. So two people asked similar question, but basically about, the first one is quite general, like has the government ever allowed these batteries to be shipped overseas? But I think it's pretty strict question to answer. But actually the other question asked about, how about this potential, the role Hong Kong, like whether we should have this local recycling facility as a whole, a very large repurposing plant or something like that, or as this person asked the question whether Hong Kong can do certain part and then you still export some of the procedures to overseas. I think it's quite a question about the potential scenario in the future. We have the batteries coming. How ready is Hong Kong's market? Should Hong Kong build everything on its own, or should Hong Kong just do a part of it and maybe mainland or maybe overseas? Anyone can try to answer this question from online person.
Well, I don't want to answer for Hong Kong, but maybe just some ideas. I mean, the theme of today is closing the resource loop. Huh? So in Europe, for what it's worth, the circular economy, we want actually producers to already at the design phase think about what happens at the end life of my product. Huh? And battery is very complicated, and I think the examples show that. At the same time, if the battery market globally is 2 trillion Hong Kong dollars, 250 billion euros, then there's a lot of money available to actually work together and look for solutions. Now, one of the elements of our circular action plan is also to say we don't want to ship our waste elsewhere, because it's the same thing. If you produce stuff, then also you better get rid of whatever comes out of it at the end of the product life. Now, there is, I think, one exception. That is actually if you have very stringent rules for recycling, repurposing, or dismissing, that if you find a place outside the union where they can follow similar or the same standards, then I think you're allowed to do that. However, you would still have the carbon footprint, and these batteries are not, I mean, they're not very light batteries, no? So if you need to ship them elsewhere, that also will then add to the carbon footprint of the product. Huh? But just some ideas or reflections from where we are coming from.
Thank you.
For the shipment of the batteries to overseas or the other places, if the waste batteries, if we obtain the consent from the other states for import, we can ship to overseas for proper treatment, provided that there is a competent facilities for the recycling, and all the recycler can get all the proof and the document for this. At present, we can do this. But as I mentioned before, some recycling companies already expressed interested that they are very interested in setting up a local battery recycling plant and doing the recycling and also the repurposing. Let's see how they can make it happen in a few years.
Anyone else want to add?
Well, I just want to share my view and experience on this is if the idea will let the market to decide how they can repurpose the battery, what they will do is they'll pick and choose. They'll choose the easiest one with the highest value and then leave the low-end ones behind. Now, then we still leave the problem back with the government. So that's why my earlier suggestion is, if you want to sell a car in Hong Kong, then the manufacturer or the agent should be responsible taking care of it in one way or another. You take it and give it to a black powder scrapyard, or you have somebody repurpose it. Because they are still the one more knowledgeable than anybody else on their own. Because can you imagine in next 10 years, there could be 100 different type of vehicle coming into Hong Kong. No way any one of those technicians will be able to learn all how to fix and safely take those battery out and disconnect them. So it only makes sense to me that if I produce it, I know it, then I'll take care of it. It'll be faster, cheaper, and safer, rather than leave it to the market on their own.
You would be in favor of a passport then, no? Because that would actually determine the kind of battery and what needs to be done.
So what was that?
The idea of having a passport coming with the battery to look at what kind of footprint there is, what kind of capacity the battery has, where it's been produced.
Well, I certainly do not object that. I think the more information come together with the battery, the better it is, because for the recycler, for the repurposing, whatever. But I think whoever's selling that product, just like if we buy a name brand air conditioning unit, if something goes wrong, I call them up. I don't just call it some John Doe on the street. So because they're supposed to know. Then why do we let them get out of the hook and then let somebody else who claim they can do it?
So for the producer responsibilities, the EV suppliers, we are reviewing how the obligations of the EV suppliers, and we will consult the stakeholder in future to see how they can do more or how they can do in the recycling of the EV batteries, because as Daniel said, they load much of the EV batteries. So if they participate more they can do more, then the recyclers or the other stakeholder can do this recycling better.
Okay, I want to control the section and finish on time. Maybe anyone want to say a last few words?
I just shortly talking about this. For us, we think that in Hong Kong, they should not have some wet chemistry. But the most important thing is that we think that retired battery is a kind of waste. But in Hong Kong, we can make it become not a kind of waste. Because for black powder, actually, it's a resources. So in Hong Kong, we can handle it. And then when other people saw it, it's not a waste. Black powder, they will buy it. And it's not some regulation, because in mainland China, actually for the retired battery, it cannot go into mainland China. And some kind of black powder can go inside. That's the reason I think it's maybe make it more interest in Hong Kong for the battery cycle. And we also think that maybe some new technology, maybe blockchain, is a hot topic about battery recycling. They discuss in mainland China. a lot of times, we can also introduce it. That's all.
Thank you everyone. Maybe very quick to summarize, I think we drill into various aspects. We have a new legislation coming in, and obviously that will affect our EV supplier, but actually there could be also business creating downstream. On the other hand, safety issue remains to be addressed. There will be more different types of batteries, different manufacturers coming in, would be a very important concern of us. And of course, in the end, how to further nurture the downstream repurposing industry. We need more transparent information, and to be honest, I think EU is moving quite fast here, I mean, potentially. And we actually have some discussion with the project in the EU Battery Directive, and it's trying to be really comprehensive, but at the same time, it's going to be very, very expensive to develop such a system. So I hope we can maintain such kind of a discussion in Hong Kong for all these topics. Maybe just a round of applause for our panelists here. Thank you.